I'm Mark Clague, Director of Entrepreneurship and Career Services for EXCEL, and I'm here with three members of the Prism Quartet, Matthew Levy, Taimur Sullivan, and Zachery Shemon, who are going to talk to us today about sort of how they got Prism started and sort of issues of branding and identity that chamber musicians face today in a crowded field. So maybe, Matt, can you tell us how Prism got its name and sort of how did you think about identity when you were getting the group started?
We did in a way. I mean, we started off as students of Don Cinta, and we kind of worked our way through traditional mid-20th century French repertoire, but decided early on that we wanted to play new music and build a body of work for our medium because there was very limited repertoire. So we began commissioning work early on and thought the idea of a prism refracting light was a nice metaphor for the idea of us playing a whole range of music on the saxophone.
So sort of splitting the tradition, opening up
Exactly.
new possibilities, new colors.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a little corny now, but we sort of like it, you know? But yeah, so that was the idea, the sort of rainbow of musical colors and sounds.
Well, you've certainly accomplished that. So how have things changed? Sort of if you look what you did then to sort of be a professional chamber music group, to get started, to get gigs, how are things different now in our new sort of maybe much more competitive environment, do you feel?
It is more competitive because there are so many more great artists working in the field of chamber music and not nearly enough opportunities for them to find an outlet for their creative work. So when we started out, we were just looking for opportunities to play, and I think that's good advice for any young group. Just play wherever, whenever possible, just to build up a body of experience, to have a chance to interact with audiences. And our first concerts were in school, and then we were looking around Ann Arbor and playing at malls. And one funny story is that one of our very first concerts was at a restaurant, and we were paid in omelets. So I got an avocado omelet for my efforts.
So how long did it take to actually start making a living off of this? Is this something, do you guys make a living completely from chamber music now? Or?
It's part of a kind of mix of activity. All of us teach at universities.
The portfolio career, as we say?
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, we all teach at universities and freelance with local orchestras and ensembles. I also am the director of Prism, so I have an administrative job within the group. That's part of my work. And the rest of the members are co-artistic directors because we collaborate on programming. We all sort of jointly decide what kind of music and we want to play, who we want to collaborate with. And so there's a real, it's really a team effort. But I think, early on we just sort of played wherever possible, and we won a Fish-Off Chamber competition. We got some recognition from Musical America as outstanding young artists, and sort of snowballed into some TV appearances from playing on NPR. And eventually we got a manager. This is over the course of maybe 8 or 9 years. And so we started playing locally and being hired by local presenters and then regional presenters and then national presenters. So it's a very long
slow
haul.
building blocks,
It is.
just taking step at a time.
It's not something I think that even now you can necessarily think that you can build a career in a very short period of time, although that is possible for some artists. But I think you have to have a real long view.
So Taimur, do you think, is it winning competitions? Is that still the key, or what do you think it is about that allows groups to sort of break in and create their own identity?
I think for some groups who have successes in competitions, that can be very helpful. There are major competitions like the Fish-Off competition for soloists and for chamber music groups, New York Concert Artists Guild, Coleman competition in California, and those...
Well, now M-Prize, of course,
and
here at the University of
M-Prize,
Michigan.
of course, right, and whoever wins that, along with some of these other major competitions, will certainly have a big step up in their career. The difficulty, is of course sustaining that, because if you win one of these major competitions, for instance, you win New York Concert Artists Guild, they set you up with management for a number of years, and so you're worked into sort of a stream of performances that are basically already set up. That lasts for about 3 or 4 years, and then you're sort of on your own, and you really then have to work on creating your own audiences and developing relationships with presenters. But I think it's also sort of a fallacy to think that the direct route to that kind of activity is through winning competitions. Because
so there are other means to break in.
Exactly. For the 2% or 3% of groups that place in those competitions or win, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of other groups that can have a lot of success, but not through the competition route necessarily.
Interesting. Zach, do you think there's sort of anything about the scene today that it really is something that musicians maybe looking to get involved with a chamber music group should think about before they take that first step?
I think a lot of things have changed, but in a lot of ways things stay the same. I think it's really at this point about gaining performance experience, as Matt said, the way that Prism began, and just developing kind of an identity as a group.
Mm-hmm.
Taimur talked a bit about chamber music competitions, and one interesting thing I find advising young groups going to do chamber music competitions is they always ask, well, what repertoire should we play? And it's hard sometimes to advise them, because if they play the same repertoire that we play, what sets them apart from Prism? Or if they play the same repertoire that a group played last year for the same competition, what sets them apart from those groups? So I think it's developing a repertoire that you believe very strongly in. And
it's a relationship with the composers and commissioning works.
Definitely, yeah. And that's something that we'll get into tonight in more depth.
Mm-hmm. So how do you balance the time that it takes to sort of do the branding and do the work of getting the gigs with maintaining the artistic quality that makes it worth having the gigs in the first place?
I mean, we are a nonprofit institution. We're 501c3. We have a board of directors. We have staff, several people. It's taken us many, many years to get to that point, but we have support from lots of foundations and corporations, and so we have like an infrastructure that helps sustain all of the creative work. And then we have the artistic programming, and we look at those as two separate kind of centers of activity. And so the artistic program is, where everything is planned out, 3 and 4 years in advance, where we block out big areas of time in our calendars, and we're planning projects, far in advance, because it takes so much time to develop the resources. But it's very methodical, and it's all about planning, so that we can make sure we allocate enough time to do all the rehearsing, to interact with other artists. A lot of what we do is collaborative, so we work with many other groups and individual artists, and so we really have to work with their schedules as well. So the planning just makes it possible. And then the administrative work is also planned out, because it's supporting all the artistic activity. So we're looking ahead 2-3 years about, and like many groups, we have a strategic plan that looks 3 years in advance. Where do we want to be in 3 years? And every year we update that plan, so it's always 3 years off. And then we look at what we've achieved and see how it lines up with what we had hoped to achieve. And so that's sort of a fun process,
So you started off managing it yourself, and then was it starting with a manager was the first professional you worked with, or do you still end up finding that you have to do, a lot of it is still do-it-yourself management along with consulting with pros?
I think we sort of have a few different streams of activity. We do have a manager, and the manager works on booking touring engagements for us. So when we travel around the country and perform with orchestras or in recitals, give master classes. For our ensemble, really the majority of our work is self-produced activity. We have sort of 2 and now 3 home bases, Philadelphia, New York City, and we're now establishing residency activities here in Michigan as well. And all of that is self-produced through our own fundraising, or through our own raising through grants and raising our own funds for those sorts of activities. And I think that's one of the things that young groups are generally most surprised by, is the amount of administrative work, like Matt was talking about, that goes into supporting the kinds of activities that you want to do. I'd say it's probably at least 80 or 90% administrative work to be able to do 10 or 20% performing if you're divided up in time. And it might even be 98% administrative work to do 2% performing, because right now we used to have a model where all 4 of us were sort of equally doing administrative work towards the group. One person was the treasurer, another person was doing grant writing, another person was doing advertising. And we sort of centralized that, and now Matt is the executive director and has taken upon himself most of those activities, but this is more than a full-time job, day in and day out, to be able to support all of the artistic activities that we do throughout the year.
Yeah, I think we look at the whole body of work that needs to be accomplished administratively, and decided at a certain point that it didn't make sense to split it amongst the members of the quartet, because there was it's just hard to divvy work up when we live in 4 different places, and there's a lot of redundancy, and so we made a major move to professionalize our infrastructure and hired other staff people to support the work I do, and we, publicists, development people, production people. So that's a big step as well. But I think for groups starting out, they don't have that luxury. So I think it's important to really identify the strengths of each person and to figure out how each person can contribute administratively. Some people may have affinity for numbers and bookkeeping, and other people may be interested in other things. But I think it's important, as part of establishing an identity is establishing a portfolio for each person that reflects their own interests and can help the group to progress.
Do you guys advise your students to sort of take other classes along with their music studies to sort of provide these skills, or is it kind of thing that most everybody just has to learn on the job by doing it?
Absolutely, it's great. I mean, I know when we were in school, there were no classes like that, and no institution had that. Talking in the 80s, the 90s, really even into the sometimes the early 2000s.
1880s.
Get your performance degree, play great, good luck, and so the question is then, if you don't have a full-time teaching job or orchestral job, how do you develop those skills? I know for myself, when I joined Prism, I was straight out of a master's degree and moved to New York City, and fortunately they had this infrastructure of how to book concerts and how to write press releases and how to approach management and deal with contractual issues and financial issues. And so it was sort of baptism by fire, learning those skills. And now we see at a lot of universities, and this is sort of why we're here doing this, is that teaching these entrepreneurial skills that everybody needs to know to be able to get their activities off the ground.
So marketing, legal issues, those kind of business basics.
One of the most fundamental issues that kind of supersedes everything is like the ability to communicate effectively through good writing skills.
Those English classes are still pretty useful.
I swear
right?
that's the most useful thing,
and
because
math. So who knew musicians needed math?
8 times 8.
Yeah, 64.
Okay, so you're already ahead of the curve.
Oh.
So yeah, there's I think when we hire people to work for us and work with us, especially publicists and people working on development and fundraising, the first thing I look at are their writing skills, because they need to be able to be as eloquent and articulate in describing our creative work as we try to be in creating that work.
Right.
So that's
was a musicologist, which is my other hat I wear around here. I'm happy to hear that.
Okay.
The communication skills are really important.
Yeah.
And it is. It's how you relate to your audience, but how you relate to donors, how you relate to board members, how you relate to granting agencies or supporters.
Especially when you're presenting things that are a little off the beaten path. I mean, it's one thing if you're presenting the complete Beethoven cycle. That's, no classical music is an easy sell, but that's going to have a built-in audience. But when you're presenting, one of our recent projects was Saxophone Quartet with traditional Chinese instruments. You really have to be able to speak eloquently about this fusion of 2 different styles across centuries.
You can't just look it up in Grove and see what the 4 talking points are.
I think attracting media and attracting resources and grants is often about the written word, because a lot of those funders and a lot of those editors are only reading about the work and just making decisions without a working knowledge of what it sounds like. But if it's really compelling in the written language, then it will have a chance of attracting those resources or media.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, just to finish up, maybe one piece of advice you'd give to a budding chamber group. Zach, why don't you start?
Well, going on the lines of what we were just talking about while you're in school, trying to take advantage of those opportunities. I think you see at schools of music and conservatories across the country programs, whether it's a class or some additional program that the school offers, taking advantage of those things, but then also trying to apply them in real life. So, I took a music business class in my master's degree, but a lot of the concepts that we were learning about only made sense to me because I was applying them in the quartet at the time.
So get started now.
So get started while you're in school and make those mistakes that chamber music's eventually.
I think about it. As a student, you can reserve a hall for free, right? You've got the lighting, you've got support staff. You don't have that when you have to get out on the outside and have to pay for it all or do it all yourself. Right, Taimur?
Yeah, I'd say start early, researching the business side of the field, meaning how concert halls book artists and how artists market themselves to presenters in concert halls. And you can even do that by going to our service organization conferences like Chamber Music America Conference or APAP, Association of Arts Presenters. It's very eye-opening to see a convention center, thousands of square feet full of management agencies selling artists to presenters, and just to see how artists sort of package themselves and create identities for themselves for that professional market. Even though it might seem many years off, it's good to just start thinking about that process.
I would say that we, as students, I think we all sort of were in this place where we thought of ourselves primarily as instrumentalists or saxophonists or whatever instrument we play. But I think now we think of ourselves as curators, which is using the model of a museum curator in music and thinking about our identity tied to the specific works that we choose to play and how we combine works and how we develop themes and concepts around groups of works. That's probably one of the most important elements of establishing an identity.
So you just start with the music you love and then expand from there?
Yeah. So I think when we're young, we look at, we're playing recitals that are just a mishmash of music and repertoire from across the, hundreds of years. But I think as we kind of progress and think about how we can attract the kind of attention that would help our careers, we have to think about developing programs that are really unified around a single idea, and that idea can really speak to an audience in a way that a bunch of unrelated pieces can't.
That's great. So, well, we're thrilled to have you here in residence at the University of Michigan, and we'll be welcoming you back in the spring as well, so we'll do this again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.